Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure, it is an honor to be with you today and presenting on tokens. I hope that my talk will stimulate a vigorous discussion afterwards, and also that will encourage us to learn more and to discover and explore more on tokens, not only in Athens, but everywhere around the world, because tokens are not unique, are by no means unique to Athens. They were also, and there are still in many other cultures across time and space. The title of my presentation today is Reflections of Politics and Finance in Ancient Athens. Tokens, what is a token? And what is the ancient term for token? Is it worth, in any case, discussing Athenian tokens? And what did the Athenians do with tokens? Some of the questions that I intended to answer this evening. Structure of my lecture. Approximately, these are the main points. First, an etymology, what the term means and where it derives from. Then the literary sources, and then the material agent to see what the objects have to tell us. Then I will revisit my definition based on the functions and the roles played by tokens in Athens. Then coming to the reason, why may have the Athenians use tokens? What is the reason? Because the agora excavations have yielded approximately 1,000 pieces, and many more are housed in collections all around the world. This is an enormous amount of ancient finds. And why may have the Athenians use the tokens? Then the question of chronology and an overview of tokens beyond Athens. Tokens have a great variety in terms of their materiality. We find tokens in 3 different materials: in bronze, in lead, and in clay. And also not only in coin shapes, but also in other shapes. Epictetus used to say that knowledge begins with examining the meaning of the words. There is a diversity of terminology observed in European languages, and this is indicative of the variety when it comes to tokens. The Greek word symbolon derives from symbalin, which means bring closer together. Symbolon is part of a whole, means a part of a whole which acquires its full significance only when it is brought closer to its other half. It also means a code, a signal, it means an agreement. Symbolon can also mean an abstract concept, and at the same time, a symbolon can be practically anything as long as it has been agreed between the two parties. In the literary sources, Symbola were exploited as a metaphors of phenomena, of various kinds of phenomena. In Plato's Symposium, in the course of discussion about love and about the nature of love, Aristophanes speaks, and Aristophanes uses the metaphor of symbolon. Aristophanes says, each of us then is a symbolon of a human being, having been sliced like flatfish, 2 from 1, and each person is always searching for the symbolon that belongs to them. Before Athens, there were tesserae hospitalis in the ancient Mediterranean of the Archaic and the Classical periods. Here is a table presented in the Zeitschrift in the journal Historia 2020 for the chronological distribution of the tesserae hospitalis. The meaning, tesserae is the Latin word for tokens, hospitalis, sealing friendship agreements, sealing hospitality agreements. The two hosts exchanged the two parts of a token, the two pieces of a token, and then their hospitality agreement could be inherited and exploited by their descendants. So we see in Homer that grandchildren of former hosts recognized each other, stopped fighting, and instead they exchanged gifts before the walls of Troy. you see that by no means only in Greek, but also in Celtiberian, in Latin, and in Etruscan language. An example of a one half of a tessera hospitalis, and how well it accords with what we hear in Euripides' Medea. In order to appease the angry Medea, Theseus promises to give her tokens. He says to his angry wife, also, I will send tokens to my friends, and my friends will treat you well. Here, the idea of split tokens, we have a geometric tessera hospitalis, the two parts of it joined together. Plautus in Penulus writes tesseram confere, and the tessera hospitalis of clasped hands. The notion of divided, the notion of the division in split tokens, and the notion of the agreement is also visually indicated by the clasped hands, and the inscription runs in Greek, recording Punic names. In Athens, the earliest split tokens, and the earliest tokens in any case, tokens and politics in classical Athens. In Athenian Politia, we hear that the demes were selling the elections. That's the key in order to interpret the three tokens that I'm showing you. Three tokens, and in each case, you see the other side of the same token. They are jigsaw tokens inscribed on both sides. On one side, we have the name of the office. On the other side, and on the other side, you see the name of the tribe inscribed along the jigsaw line. When the two pieces were brought together, you can imagine approximately 500 such pieces scattered on a table surface, on a tabletop, and then brought again together. This meant that the procedure of allotment had succeeded, was successful. The reason for doing such an allotment was that the demes were selling the elections. The poorer demes used to sell the offices to the richer demes. But the point in democracy is that everyone has a share in power, that the quality of speech must be maintained and preserved at any cost. So this is a case where technology is called into. Now technology comes into play, so that proportionally the allotment of offices is done per tribe, but proportionally the demes are present. And in order to stipulate which deem candidate will be elected in his tribal office, this was the system used. Mid-5th century BC, in the procedure of establishing a more radical democracy. I would like to remind you the reforms of Ephialtes, the reforms of Pericles, leading up to radical democracy of the second half of the 5th century. Here an overview of the many and different literary sources on Symbola. We will particularly pay attention to Herodotus. Here is the story of the Spartan Glaucus and the Milesian, and the Milesian who is not named. The Milesian was afraid that because of the unrest in Asia Minor, his fortune would be lost. So he liquidized his fortune and went to Sparta, found there Glaucus. Glaucus had the reputation of being very just. He deposited the money with Glaucus. They exchanged tokens between them with the promise that whoever comes with the same tokens and demands the money, Glaucus will give it back. Indeed, a few years later, the sons of the man came to Sparta. They spoke with Glaucus, showing him the tokens and demanding the money back. Glaucus refused to give it, and then begins another story with a moral outcome, as typical for Herodotus. It is interesting for us to see, however, that tokens are a piece of evidence, but they are not a compelling evidence, and that in fact, taking an oath, Glaucus thought that I can take an oath and then I can avoid. Then I can avoid giving the money back. I can evade this. This is indicative that they are not a compelling piece of evidence. In Aristophanes, in the birds, a city under siege, Iris sneaks through the defenses and is brought under guard to face Piseterus' interrogation. So Piseterus, angry, in an angry manner, asks, "How have you sneaked through the gates? Was there anyone to seal your passport? Did you not have a token? So a token that can be compared with your token." This passage can be easily compared with Aeneas Tacticus, the very famous treatise of the 2nd century AD on the ways and methods of war. And there, there we learn that when a city was under siege, tokens were given to the ones coming in or going out as a proof of evidence of their identity. So the ones that were going out, they could easily return in the city when they showed their pass as a proof of identity, in order to avoid the spies. Indeed, identification tokens for the military, they are there. From the 4th and 3rd century BC Athens, we have identification tokens for the military. Tokens that relate to the clerukes, the overseas colonies of Athens, tokens that relate to the troops patrolling the borders of the Athenian state. We have such tokens. There is also a case of a split token that half of them was, this is the token MC 1245 in the Agora, addressed to the peripolar Xenocleas. Half of them was brought by the courier, another half of it was kept by the officer himself, and then it was compared. Who is the issuer of Symbola in ancient Athens? It is the council. The Clinias decree, the very, very famous Clinias decree, which relates how the tribute was brought back to Athens, how the tribute was conveyed to Athens from the Athenian allies. We are in the time of the First Athenian League. Tokens shall be made for the cities, it says. And the matter here is about sealing tokens, a writing tablet. On this tablet, the tribute is recording. The city seals the writing tablet with a token that was given by the council. And then this is all unsealed and read aloud before the council in the Athenian Agora. What we have from the Athenian Council House today, the excavations have showed a concentration of official types. With my pointer, I will show you that here is approximately the Athenian Council House, and in the vicinity there is a concentration. The blue dots marks the concentration of tokens. There's a significant concentration of tokens, and almost all of them bear official types. By official types, I mean signs typical for the Athenian city-state, the owl framed by olive sprays as IL 624, or the head of Athena. Another official type is the Kyrikaion, the winged Tadukius, IL 54. More literary sources shed more light on the uses of tokens in Athens. Letter tokens for the jurors. It's about sitting arrangements, sitting in the panel. In the Athenian Politia, every juror as he entered, he takes an official token. What was the purpose of it? The panels of jurors were randomly allocated to their sitting benches in the court in order to thwart bribery. We hear about the case of Anytos, who bribed a whole jury panel in the late 5th century in order to prevent the jurors from building factions. Pay tokens for the jurors, a second category of tokens, again for the jurors. These are the tokens exchanged after they have voted for their pay. They were marked with a number 3. The reason is that in 425 BCE and during the entire antiquity, jurors were paid with just 3 obols. Possible candidates for the tokens exchanged for the jury pay are the tokens which bear the same design as the silver Athenian triobols. The silver Athenian triobols have the design of an owl standing frontal, framed by 2 olive sprays, and this is exactly replicated with precision by this lead Athenian token. While this, the other, the IL 1134, it alterates a little the design by placing the owl standing to the right and framed by a wreath. Then we are ready now to view our functionalist definition for Symbola. After having discussed the sources and after having viewed the first set of material, we are ready to face the functionalist definition. Tokens connect people, are there to connect people who were previously strangers by means of friendship and hospitality. Their role is to sanction agreements between the concluding parties. It's an acknowledgement of an obligation. The state acknowledges the obligation to pay the jurors for state service. Glaucus had to give the money back, and he's punished by the gods for not giving it back, for not respecting his promise. It's also a means for confirming identity. I confirm that I am a juror charged by the state to serve in the panel. I confirm that I am a soldier assigned to the Peripolarch, or assigned to this general in Samos. 2 more textual sources were added by Margaret Crosby in the 1960s, which are very important to us. The first of these sources is indicative of the fact that tokens were used in the assembly. And the other source is an inscription in Eleusis. It's a decree in Eleusis. There, a detachment of soldiers honors Dion, a certain Dion. Dion is not named any further with his patronym, with his father's name. We don't know many things about Dion. We only know what is stated in the inscription, that Dion had previously served as secretary to the treasury of the Sidonic Fund. He was treasurer to the Sidonic Fund. And this Dion is honored by the soldiers because he was zealous in the distribution of the ecclesiastica tokens given out for the grain. With just a few words, we hear that Symbola were named ecclesiastica, and at the same time they served grain distributions. Obviously, tokens for the assembly, ecclesia called in ancient Greek, had become so proverbial that the term came to apply to every token in Hellenistic Athens. Letter tokens for the assembly, here we are. They are made of clay. They have reverses with letters and reverses and another series with double of letters. 24 letters of the Greek alphabet, plus the sum P, the character sum P, plus the fact that we have the doubles of letters, that makes us with 50 series of or 50 different benches to sit in the assembly. This also corroborates with literary sources, the assembly women. Why have sitting arrangements in the assembly? And not only the assembly, but also in the council. Philochorus says that council first began by sitting by letter in the year 410, in the year 409, to avert like-minded from sitting together. For example, in Thucydides, we hear that Alcibiades' supporters were sitting together. Aristophanes' assembly women, the women disguised as men, have the plan to sit together and vote en bloc and to turn over the whole institution of the men and to take over the power themselves. And what time are we now? What is the period? What is the historical circumstances? 410, it's immediately after the restoration of the democracy. So the Athenians are very cautious about the democratic institutions, about safeguarding quality of speech, and so their citizens have to sit randomly, and so that they can decide on their own without being influenced, without forming factions that can shout down the orator, for example. Different examples of letter tokens for the council, for the assembly, for the jurors. But there are further reasons why may have the Athenians used tokens in order to letter tokens for the assembly. And here and later in my presentation, I will turn to inscriptions also outside from Athens. Here in a decree from Iasos from the time of Alexander the Great. This Iasos decree, which was first discussed by Philippe Gautier, says discusses not only the preoccupation for controlling the entrance to the assembly, because only Athenian citizens should enter the assembly. It's not only that, confirming a citizen identity. It's more controlling the budget. If the Athenian state, just like Iasos, has a certain amount of money in order to cover the expenditure of the assembly goers, and at the same time they have to reach a certain quorum so that the assembly meeting is valid, they use tokens. The quorum in the assembly, in particular for the naturalization decrees, for the cases of naturalizing foreigners, was 6,000 citizens. So 6,000 Symbola were distributed, and at the same time guaranteed it, this Symbola, that the expenditure would not exceed the prearranged limits. Let's go now to the grain distribution. Because the decree from Eleusis, the decree honoring Dion, instructed us that tokens were used for grain distributions. First, let's have a look on the mechanisms of grain distribution in ancient Athens. It is Sitonai. Sitonai are magistrates who received public money or rich magistrates, and out of their own money, they purchased grain and they organized the public sale of grain or a free grain distribution. At the same time, in Athens, there are the gifts from the Hellenistic rulers. Here a sample of the many tokens excavated in the Athenian Agora with grain iconography. Although tokens suggest rationing, a closer look at the tokens suggests more or less a feeling of prosperity, of abundance. It's an optimistic view. More evidence on grain distributions is that there are connections between the added symbols of the Stephanophoric coinage of Athens and the tokens themselves, connections between the new style, as we call it, coinage. That means that magistrates were in action, issuing both the Hellenistic coinage of Athens and issuing both the tokens, and perhaps the same magistrates were issuing. This you can easily find it in the catalog published by Crosby in 1964 in the Athenian Agora, volume 10. What I have done here is presented the same conclusions in a map. So Crosby L46, I refer to Crosby's type. Again, we have to turn outside of Athens to cover our lacuna. The grain law of Samos, dated in the 260s, narrates the establishment of a public fund for the provision of grain and educated calculations of the quantity of the grain, enables, on the basis of this decree, of this grain law, the hypothesis that citizens may have levied 2 henikes, just 2 daily rations per month, or 2 henikes for a period either of 3 months or even 5 months. So the grain that was purchased by the Sitonei was just a small quantity. And in order to be as wisely as possible distributed to the citizen body, which counted a few thousands of men, these were done in a very prudent manner. Just 2 rations for a month for a period of 3 or 5 months. This is this is why may have the Athenians, this is the response why may have the Athenians and other Greek city-states used tokens for managing their resources, for managing in a more wise, in a more prudent way, their few available resources. Two good cases of grain distribution. It's the Antigonids grain gift to Athens. The Antigonids on their grain tokens placed the Macedonian eagle. Macedonian eagle is placed on them. Many of these tokens, approximately 12 pieces, were found in deposits dating from the from the late 3rd century BCE and relating to Lachares, to the story of Lachares in ancient Athens. And here on the other side, some of the 88 tokens which were found in a well in a rural in the rural deme of Koropi. These are again grain tokens because we have an owl sitting on a grain stock, on an ear of grain. Then, if tokens were used in the assembly funds, if tokens were used for the grain fund, then let's put forward the hypothesis that tokens were used for every fund in ancient Athens. We have the assembly fund in ancient Athens. We have the juror funds. We first hear of it in the 350s. We have the strategic fund. We have the theoric fund. The theoric fund probably is the most important because Eubulus, who was in charge of the general financial administration of the city, he was also controlling the theoric fund. The funds are integrated in the merismos. Merismos is the procedure of allocating state revenue to the spending authorities of the Athenian state. Merismos is something that was established in Athens, is a method for financial management after the end of the Peloponnesian War. From the early 4th century onwards, it's the standard method for administering revenue and expenditure. In nowadays, merismos is also used, it's the default budgeting. Extra money for one sector can only be found taking money from another sector. Let's have a look on the theoric fund, welfare allowances and tokens. I'm not suggesting that tokens were used as theater tickets, but tokens were used for the welfare allowances in the financial administration under Eubulus and later under Lycurgus. What was the reason? Because we have a generous distribution of welfare allowances, and this is the biggest item of the budget, especially after the end of the social war in the mid 350s. Athens makes a turn in her policy. The city concentrates on the welfare of its citizens and has to bid farewell to the plans for ruling all over the Aegean. This is more evident also after the defeat in the Battle of Chaeronea. Then the Athenian state tokens, which begin in the 4th century, serve in the best possible way the operational finances of the government. If they helped monitoring public expenditure on the one hand, tokens help managing the financial resources on the other, and in my opinion, they can effortlessly be related to the distribution of welfare allowances. By welfare allowances, I mean the diobelia for the poorer, 2 obols allowance for the poorer, and I mean, and besides that also, it is pay for public service. Let's have a look on tokens for the strategic fund. Approximately 10% of the tokens excavated in the Agora have a military design, just a sample here. But the military factor is also important for the beginnings. Already in the late 5th century BCE, but the majority, or I would say the issue of lead tokens begins in the 4th century BCE, probably in the first half of the 4th century BCE. The first half of the 4th century BCE is marked with a great military effort from the part of Athens to recover control of the Aegean and the military expeditions of the Second Athenian League. The generals, all the generals, including Timotheus, are in financial hardships. They are trying to raise revenue. Timotheus resorts to fiduciary coinage. And all this, considering also the fact that the military is in need of everyday rationing can probably lead us to think that the historical conditions of the 4th century led to this explosion of issuing lead tokens, which continued with the policy of welfare allowances by Eubulus and later by Lycurgus. The hoard of armor tokens with letters needs revisiting. It was thought that actually these tokens can only serve the distribution of pieces of armor. And that some of the species, especially the token with the figure of the goddess Nike, was for a piece of armor that has no size, that all the letters signify sizes. Now with the finding of a figure of Nike paired with the letter gamma, this shows that the hoard of armor tokens, all this is indicative that it needs revisiting, the hoard of armor tokens. I have a theory. Perhaps it's better to present it in another chance in the future. Tokens and festivals. The Theoring Fund did not only entail festival distributions for festivals, but it was for all kind of citizen distributions, including distributions in kind. However, tokens distributed for festivals do exist among the tokens housed in collections or the tokens from the archaeological record. This is an amphora framed by ivy wreath, and it has two letters, delta and eta, which probably stand for the word demotion. Demotion, meaning public, as we know these two letters from so many other public instruments of the Athenian Agora. Another token which may have been used for a festival is this token with the name of the deme framed by a wreath. A rare case of a token with official iconography, a cicada, the symbol of Athenian citizen, with a tripod and two names that can be traced in the prosopography of ancient Athens. They have served as agonothetai. Then this is a typical example of tokens. These are typical examples for tokens for festivals. More tokens of festivals, all the tribal tokens, tokens connecting to Athenian tribes, may have also been issued and distributed on the occasion of festivals. We have the decree for the Lesser Panathemia. There, the portions of the sacrifice are distributed per demes and per tribes. The pentedrachmia, meaning the sum of 5 drachmas. The theoric distributions in the late 4th century amounted 5 drachmas, and there are so many tokens. Svoronos, the great Svoronos managed to catalog 47 different types of Athenian tokens, all of them bearing the letters P, Epsilon, E, probably relating to pentedrachmia. In my opinion, they must relate to pentedrachmia. They have in the past various other theories, and Svoronos thinks something entirely different. But in my opinion, all these tokens have a festival iconography, all these 47 different types. For example, this tripod on a filleted omphalos. Here we have a bucranion, a mask, a tragic mask, and all of them inscribed to P, Epsilon, and E. Again, some evidence on the chronology, a token from the late 5th century, a token from a context of the 4th century BCE. And of course, tokens were not unique to Athens and not unique to Greeks. There are so many examples for other Greek city-states. Previous in Neolithic Mesopotamian, tokens were used for for managing for managing agricultural production and for distributing agricultural production to the population. And a dozen of different shapes stood for different qualities and quantities of cereals, and they were put inside clay envelopes, which had this form, this shape of clay bulle. And before being placed inside these clay envelopes, they were pressed against from the outside. So at the same time, they communicated what was inside, and at the same time, they managed, they enabled procedures of counting. What is tokens? Tokens, it's a success story. The Athenians took over a technology that was already known from the Neolithic period. It was already known as tesserae hospitalis for sealing agreements from the archaic and the classical periods in the ancient Mediterranean, and created something new, something that suited their own political system and their own financial system. Tokens is a piece of evidence for the technology in politics and in finance. And this, in my opinion, calls for revisiting any assumption for low levels of technology in antiquity. In modern day, in our modern days, theoreticians of politics and of economics argue about the question: is there any relationship between democracy and economic growth? The answer is yes. The Athenians of the 4th century were faced with great challenges. In the 4th century, and especially the time of Eubulus and Lycurgus, marks a major turning point in the history of Athens. These two politicians succeeded in raising revenue and restoring revenue in a city that was almost bankrupt. And they succeeded in keeping democracy and in enabling democracy through economic growth. These allowances, the fact that they exploited in maximum all the possible resources of revenue, and then this was in a wise manner, in a prudent manner, redistributed to the citizenry, and at the same time upholding their navy, upholding and upkeeping the agrarian production of their city-state was all managed through tokens.